The Nantex-class territorial defense starfighter, commonly known among fans simply as the Geonosian starfighter, could easily be mistaken for just another class of separatist starfighter, albeit one with more limited use and a higher success rate than the typical Vulture droid. But this agile craft was actually an engineering marvel, a collection of exotic Geonosian engineering techniques that made for a fighter like no other. In this video, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the Nantex-class starfighter and exploring what made it so cool.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Manufactured by Tisk Shipwrights Collective, the Nantex Territorial Defense Starfighter was rather small, less than 10 meters long, but it was highly effective, owing in large part to its unique Beak-Wing design. The manufacturing process used to create these craft was highly intricate and uniquely Geonosian, but it played a major part in the starfighter's effectiveness. Construction began with the starfighter's internal systems, which were wrapped in heated strands of lamina steel, the same material used in the construction of Geonosian hives. The lamina steel hardened to form an extremely resilient armored shell around the fighter's components, and once it was in place, the two main halves of the craft were complete. These were then fitted with magnetic hardpoints, and the craft's weapons and thruster balls were installed between them. The two halves of the craft and the modules between them were only held together magnetically for reasons we'll discuss later. Once the craft itself was constructed, it needed a pilot. While most starfighters were interchangeable, able to be flown by any pilot with the proper training, Nantex-class starfighters were actually bonded to individual pilots. The Geonosian pilot caste, a wingless subcaste that sat somewhere between the winged Geonosian warriors and the slave-like Geonosian drones, were raised from birth for the sole purpose of piloting these starfighters. They spent most of their lives in cob-shaped air defense hives, constantly ready for action, as Geonosian pilots were bred to require no sleep. As pupas, each pilot was paired with the flight computer of a specific starfighter, bonding them to their craft and creating a close rapport that made them highly effective. The Nantex-class starfighter was designed around these unusual pilots. Once bonded with their craft's flight computer, Geonosian pilots could fly as a matter of instinct, allowing them to take full advantage of their ship's extraordinary maneuverability. The control scheme for these craft were entirely alien, with 4 multi-axis control yokes that required Geonosian dexterity to operate. Flight status feedback and commands from air marshals were conveyed to the pilot via artificial pheromones generated by scent simulator masks worn by the pilots. This meant that only Geonosians and specially modified pilot droids could fly these craft. According to Poggle the Lesser, the only human who ever tried to pilot a Nantex fell out of the sky like a damp moth. Though they had landing gear and could be stored conventionally, Geonosian starfighters were designed to be stored in specialized docking clamps built in their homeworld's air defense hives. When not in use, a whole chunk of the back half of the craft opened up to provide access for the pilot, as the starfighter's cockpit was buried pretty deep in the upper half of the ship. Thousands of Nantex-class starfighters were stored at the Geonosian's air defense hives in this manner, ready to be launched to defend Geonosis at a moment's notice. The Nantex was composed of 2 beak-shaped hulls magnetically joined around a pair of central modules. The two halves of the fighter looked pretty similar, but internally they were actually very different. The lower hull was dominated by the ship's main reactor, and it also featured the craft's main power cells, power converters, and scanners. The upper hull, meanwhile, contained the cockpit, flight computer, communication systems, fuel tanks, and gravity generators. The beak-shaped front sections of the hulls each featured inertial compensators, shield generators, and tractor beam projectors. Each Nantex-class starfighter featured about 100 miniature tractor beam projectors built along the sides of its nose sections, which have some interesting utility that we'll get to in a bit. 2 modules were magnetically attached between the 2 hulls, the thruster module in the rear and the weapons module up front. Both modules featured a unique ball socket design, which allowed the modules to receive power and fuel regardless of how it was oriented. the thruster received fuel via a highly flexible hose, while the laser cannon's internal covering was pockmarked with induction points that would invariably overlap with the ship's power trunkings. This was highly unusual and advantageous, as it allowed both modules an extraordinary degree of flexibility. The Nantex was propelled only by a single thruster, but it was still extremely fast, capable of accelerating up to 4,500 Gs in open space and reaching speeds of 1,250 km per hour in atmosphere. It was also one of the most maneuverable starfighters of its time, not only due to the ball mount of its thruster, but also due to those tractor beams we mentioned earlier, which performed constant minor adjustments to the starfighter's trajectory. The Nantex was made even more slippery by the fact its pilot seemed to have gone to the Anakin Skywalker school of starfighter tricks, constantly spinning around while in combat. It's never explained why they do this, but our best guess is that it acts as rifling of sorts for the starfighter's laser cannon, increasing its accuracy. The Nantex was a pretty tough craft, equipped with both shield generators and a particularly tough hull. Its laminar steel armoring had energy dispersing properties, and it was ever so slightly flexible, allowing it to absorb kinetic energy from impacts. It was also, of course, well armed. The Nantex-class's weapon mounts were entirely modular, and while these starfighters typically supposed a single laser cannon mounted in a ball socket, this could be swapped out for advanced sensor suites or an ion cannon. The laser cannon configuration was the most common, however, and for good reason. That main gun was pretty powerful and extremely accurate. Its accuracy was further bolstered by the starfighter's tractor beam projectors, which could adjust the trajectory of laser cannon bolts and even lock onto enemy craft, slowing them down and making them easier targets. Thus, while the Geonosian pilots could aim pretty damn well on their own, their starfighters also featured built-in aim assist, making things like this especially dumb to say.
Good thing those bugs can't aim.
All in all, the Nantex-class territorial defense starfighter was an engineering marvel, one of the deadliest craft in the whole Separatist arsenal. However, despite the Geonosians' close alliance with the Confederacy of Independent Systems, these starfighters were mercifully uncommon during the Clone Wars. This was mainly for two reasons. First, they required Geonosian pilots or specialized pilot droids, both of which are inefficient when compared to the droid starfighters the CIS favored. Second, the Nantex had fairly limited range. It was, after all, designed for territorial defense first and foremost. On Geonosis, this wasn't a problem. The starfighter had been built to defend Geonosis, after all, and there were air defense hives scattered all over the planet. The Nantex was thus a fairly common sight in the Geonosian sky, and squadrons of them ran regular patrols through the planet's rings as well, which these maneuverable craft were better at traversing than most starfighters. In other systems, however, the Nantex required the support of a specialized carrier, such as a Geonosian corvette or a class of massive orbital defense platform sometimes employed by the IGBC. Thus, the Nantex only took part in a few Clone Wars battles. Chief among these were both battles of Geonosis, as you might expect. During the first battle of Geonosis, the Republic's assault ships orbitally bombarded the Geonosians' air defense hives before most of their fighters could launch, and as a result, only a handful of these agile craft participated in the battle, ceding air superiority to the Republic. This lack of air superiority was largely what cost the Separatists the battle, and thus, during the second battle of Geonosis, air superiority was a major focus for the Geonosians. They deployed swarms of Nantex-class starfighters before the Republic could shell their hives, and with support from Geonosian artillery, these fighters made a massive impact on the early phase of the battle, inflicting massive casualties on Republic forces. Apart from these two battles, however, the Nantex class only featured in two notable campaigns: the Hunt for the Decimator, where a few squadrons of them supported the armies of Severance 10, and the Battle of Munilinst, in which swarms of droid-piloted Nantex-class starfighters fought to defend the Banking Clan homeworld. After the eventual defeat of the Geonosians in the second Battle of Geonosis, the Nantex class pretty much disappeared from service, and it never saw a return to prominence. So that's our look at the Nantex-class territorial defense starfighter, one of the Geonosian's greatest masterpieces. But what do you think? Are there other starfighters you'd like us to see analyze? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and what you think about this specific starfighter. Keen to read your comments, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.